So this was makes a film truly anti-war social.
If you have spent any time watching video essays on war movies, you will probably have encountered François Truffaut's famous quote, "There's no such thing as an anti-war film." If a movie's role is to transport the viewer into the thoughts, emotions and lived experience of the soldiers on screen, then making an anti-war film is indeed impossible. Nevertheless, many directors of course have tried to do this, and often to great cinematic effect. Saving Private Ryan, for example, draws us into the subjective experience of war by using a handheld point-of-view camera style that immerses the viewer into the chaos and violence as if they were one of the soldiers on screen. And 1917 tries to do the same by making the movie seem like one shot. Director Sam Mendes explains that he tried to lock the audience into the men's experiences, the feeling that you are going to live through the story with them.
And that feeling that you're sort of locked into this ticking clock, and you're also experiencing distance and difficulty with the men, and there's no way out.
However, no matter how immersive the experience, the fact remains that the viewer will always watch these war films from a safe environment, without the mortal fear the soldiers in these wars experience. And thus, according to Truffaut, no matter how gruesome or horrific the violence on screen, it will always devolve into spectacle. World War II veteran Samuel Fuller once remarked even that for a film to be true to the actual nature of war, bullets would need to be sprayed out from the screen, taking out members of the audience at random in scattershot carnage. Yet, in my opinion, this does not mean that there is no such thing as an anti-war film, although they are probably more rare than one might think. In this video, I want to argue why All Quiet on the Western Front is one of those rare movies, a true anti-war film, and a film that broke my heart and at various moments had me close to tears. So what makes an anti-war film? In the past decades, many war films have focused on showing the reality and gruesomeness of war. And although, as I stated before, these films can never let their audiences experience the same horrors these soldiers feel, they do break through important pro-war myths, one of which is what I would call the victorious warrior myth. This is the myth that wars are survivable based on your skill set.
But I'm fighting the Trojans, cousin. Not today. But I'm ready, you taught me how to fight.
Now, throughout history, young men have been eager to go to war because despite their danger, wars are also a way to adventure, glory, a chance to prove to be better than the men in front of you.
We were all lads together, you know, full of excitement and all this kind of thing. I mean, I just wanted to have a go at Jerry.
And the belief is that although going to war certainly brings dangers with it, if you prepare well and are careful, you will certainly survive. In more recent war movies, this is of course what the bootcamp sequence is about.
The Marine Corps wants killers. The Marine Corps wants to build indestructible men. Men without fear.
Now, although of course military training has huge advantages and there are things that can be done to slightly increase your chance of survival, more often than not, war is random carnage and destruction, a meat grinder where survival is based on sheer luck and where the survival rate becomes near zero if you spend too much time at the front, or if you are placed in an unlucky position by your superiors. As a World War II veteran remarked, at first I knew I would survive because, well, I was me. Then I thought I might die unless I trained hard and was very careful. Then later I realized I was already dead.
The only hope you have is to accept the fact that you're already dead.
But not all war movies that show the gruesome carnage and random death of soldiers without a single chance of survival are necessarily anti-war movies. A famous example of this is Steven Spielberg's Saving Private Ryan. As scholar Agnieszka Monet points out in her paper Is There Such a Thing as an Anti-War Film?, Saving Private Ryan depicts combat as brutal, yet World War II itself is sacred and its generation's sacrifice is seen as deeply honorable. In fact, fact, it is hard to find any film that suggests World War II was not an important war to have fought and won. Now, of course, we know the reason for this. I often think about this scene in Band of Brothers where Easy Company is riding past defeated German soldiers and Private Webster shouts out in frustration.
Interrupting our lives for what? You ignorant, servile scum! What the fuck are we doing here?
Of course, later in the same episode, aptly called Why We Fight, we find out exactly the reason for them being there. It is possible that the Second World War was a pro-war war. A war worth fighting, even dying for. Yet there are some historians that are questioning the Second World War's role as the quote-unquote good war, and certainly, just as any other war, World War II saw brutality, evil and innocent deaths on both sides. Now, whether World War II was a good war or not, it is certain that in the endless wars of history, very few have been worth fighting and dying over. And in the last 70 years, World War II as a just and good war has been used to get young men to die for the greed, ambitions and narcissism of those in power. Which brings me to what is the core aspect of a true anti-war film. As Monet writes, the ideological underpinning of the military as an institution depends on the fiction that every soldier's death matters, that it has agency and that it strengthens the nation for which it occurs, either militarily or in some other more mystical way, often the ritual power of sacrifice. An anti-war movie needs to break through the myth of heroic sacrifice, the idea that a soldier's death is meaningful, to expose the old lie, duce et decorum est pro patria mori, or in English, it is sweet and proper to die for one's country. For a film to be truly anti-war, Monet argues, a film would need to show war not only as ineffective, morally wrong, destructive to the soldier, civilian and society that accepts it, but also show death in combat as meaningless and utterly unredeemed. The problem is that narrative film is better at enchantment than disenchantment, better at activating myth and creating magic through spectacle than breaking through myth. But I would argue All Quiet on the Western Front is in fact a true anti-war film. I mean, the first moments in the film that really hit me hard was the opening sequence. The strongest aspect of this opening sequence is the dichotomy between the young boys who are getting destroyed in the war and the uncaring war machine. I mean, the soldier we follow in the opening moments is a minor character, but his fear and humanity sounds true in the way he calls his friends who are getting killed in front of him. And in the sequence after that, we see the turning cogs of the war machine, the meat grinder. Killed boys are stripped of their uniforms, including the soldier we just witnessed, the mud, blood and guts washed away, and the holes and tears restitched. Uniforms ready for a new batch of hopeful recruits to wear while they march to their death. The officers and generals fully aware of what they are doing.
Meine Freunde, das sind Sie! Darum aus in den Kampf! Für Kaiser, Gott und Vaterland!
This opening immediately breaks through the myth of the heroic sacrifice, the idea of remembrance. It shows that these soldiers were just cannon fodder to be discarded after, and does exactly what Monet argues a true anti-war film should do. It shows dying in combat as meaningless and utterly unredeemed. I want to draw a comparison between All Quiet on the Western Front and the most recent major World War I movie, 1917. I feel All Quiet on the Western Front is the film that 1917 should have been. Now, don't get me wrong, I regard 1917 very highly, and I think it is a great film where Sam Mendes did something very special for the war movie genre with its one-shot technique. But I think it could have been a stronger anti-war movie, a stronger World War I film, better at showing the sheer brutality of the war, that it was a pointless meat grinder without any form of remembrance or heroic purpose for millions of young men. because 1917 is essentially a hero's journey where our protagonist prevails in the end and saves the lives of 1600 men. As my colleague Tom from Like Stories of Old points out, would the film not have a stronger message, more in line with the reality of World War I, if in the end our protagonist had failed to deliver the message, or his message was ignored by command and all the men died anyway? Of course, this would have been quite a bold and un-Hollywood-like creative choice. But All Quiet on the Western Front does exactly that by having its main character die a pointless death, seconds before the end of the war, with nothing gained. The sad historical reality is that between the signing of the armistice at 5 AM in the morning and the official end of the First World War, 3,000 more people died, including an American soldier called Henry Gunter in the last minute of the war. The reason for the 6-hour delay between signing the armistice and it going into effect was supposedly to have time to pass the news across the front line, but it was also because of the poetic symmetry it would bring to the end of the war, to end it on the 11th hour on the 11th day of the 11th month.
Der Waffenstillstand tritt in 6 Stunden in Kraft, in der 11. Stunde am 11. Tag des 11. Monats.
So the narcissistic drive for poetic meaning by the generals cost another 3,000 men their lives, 3,000 men who would not see their mothers, fathers, girlfriends, fiancés, wives or children again. Finally, I do think it is important to say that a film is not automatically better when it is an anti-war movie. Historically, heroism does happen in wars, and these stories deserve to be told. But we must also be aware that war movies have a real influence on our society. Monet points out that a crude but good way to measure if a war movie is pro or anti-war is to track its influence on military enlistment numbers. And many films, including some that had the intention of being anti-war movies, have actually boosted enlistment of the military, including Full Metal Jacket, for example. In the end, the question of pro-war and anti-war cinema...
Just over there, yeah, I think I can sort the last part though. Some brutal in there, but still, saving public line is the best one we ever done.